Hello again and welcome to the Warhammer 40k Imperial Guard Tactics series. Today guys we will be continuing our Militarum Tempestus Scions Tactics series with a review of the Kappic Eagles Regiment. As always, this will be a deep, fine detail analysis. We will be going into the Regimental Doctrine, the Warlord trait, unique relic and stratagem for this regiment. On top of that, we will be looking at the best way to run them. Do they work best as a standalone force, or are they better used in an Imperial Guard, Soup or General combined Imperial armed force? Now, for those that don't know, the Kappic Eagles are actually the poster child for the Militarum Tempestus Scions. They're the guys that you see on all the box art and the majority of the codex art, the ones with the grey, blue and gold colour scheme. But without further ado, let's get on with this review and let's take a look at the Kappic Eagles. So the first thing that I want to look at is the Regimental Doctrine, and this is mobilised infantry. Now the exact wording for this from the rulebook is: infantry models with this doctrine do not suffer the penalty for moving and firing heavy weapons when resolving an attack made by a model with this doctrine in a turn in which it disembarked from a transport. Add 1 to the hit roll. So this is a very interesting doctrine and quite powerful. Now obviously having no penalty to moving and firing heavy weapons at first can seem a bit confusing because, well, Scions don't use heavy weapon teams. No, they don't, but they do get access to the hotshot volley gun, which is a heavy weapon. It's unusual because nearly every other Scion weapon is an assault weapon, but the hotshot volley gun is a heavy weapon. It's strength 4, it's AP -2, and it fires 4 shots. Now, it's only 7 points for a hotshot volley gun, and a lot of people like them, but the reason why it's kind of divisive in the community whether you should take them or not is because they're heavy, and so they, when you move and shoot with your Scions, which are a typically very mobile force, you suffer with it. The Kappic Eagles don't have that problem. They can move and shoot those hotshot volley guns for days with no issues. The second part is also really good because it means you can have essentially the same ability that you get from the Vigilus Drop Force Commandos detachment, which is where when you disembark you get add 1 to the hit roll. Now you don't, with the Vigilus attachment you need to be around a specific character, you spend command points on it, you spend relics on it. With the Kappic Eagles you get out of a transport, any transport, you get +1 to hit with your infantry. Okay, now the units that immediately jump to mind when we think about this are Taurox Primes. They are the classic transport of the Militarum Tempestus Scions, and yes, that is a very good use, very good place to have your Scions and a good use of the trait. Even better though is when you take into account that you don't have to be in a specific Militarum Tempestus transport like a Taurox Prime. You can also benefit from this from being in a Valkyrie, and this suddenly starts making, when you take that into account, it suddenly starts making you realize how powerful this Regimental Doctrine can be. In fact, the not suffering the penalty for moving and firing heavy weapons, whilst looks great on paper, actually only affects one weapon system. It's a great weapon system, don't get me wrong, but it only affects one. This other part of the trait affects every weapon system in your army. Your hotshot las guns, but most of your grenade launchers, your melter guns, but most importantly it affects your plasma guns, because when you add 1 to the hit roll, the way that modifiers work in 8th edition is what it essentially does is it makes your plasma safe to overcharge. If you have a Kappic Eagle unit, disembark from a transport and you overcharge your plasma, any 1s that you roll technically get modified into 2s. And that means you didn't roll a 1 and therefore you don't get the overcharge and death when you overcharge the weapon. So that's really good. Having super safe plasma is very powerful. What it lets you do is essentially take advantage of a Scion Alpha Strike via Valkyrie deployment. You start off on the game, maybe a couple of Valkyries, pack 4 5-man squads, 2 in each one, with an officer in each one, and you fly these transports forward, you jump out, and you just unleash plasma death. And you can give them reroll 1s to hit from the officers, and then you can also be hitting on 2s because you just jumped out with your plasma. It's really, really powerful. It's really, really powerful. Now, what are my criticisms of this Regimental Doctrine? Why do I think that this is... I mean, I'll be honest with you, it's not as good as the Land and Lion ones. And it's, you know, in many ways, it's also maybe not as good as the crack shot one from the 43rd Iotan Dragons that we reviewed last week. Well, the problem is that it only affects infantry models. Okay, and the second part of it is that it doesn't. It's forcing you to start your guys in transports. Okay, because if you don't start in transports, then you're not really getting the advantage of the main part of this regimental trait. And what you want to be doing with your Scions is you want to be doing some deep striking. Yes, you will have people in transports, but you want something that's going to help you with your deep strike. And unfortunately, this means that it kind of forces you to try and start your whole army on the board. And that's not what Scions typically want to be doing. Scions want a good part of their force in deep strike because they're fragile. Now, we can get into this a little bit later on, but I think if you were to take a pure Kappic Eagles force, you're going to find yourself really trying to force you to put as much on the board at the start of the game and be in as many transports as possible, and that could mean that you're taking more transports than you initially want to, which means you've got more points going into transports than you do have going into what would have essentially been deep striking infantry. And yeah, the argument could be made where you don't have to take advantage of your Regimental Doctrine at every possible turn. That is true, but if you're not doing, then you're not getting maximum efficiency from that Regimental Doctrine. If it's not kicking in every turn, if it's not doing something for you every turn, then it's not as good as a Regimental Doctrine that is essentially a bonus which you'll get no matter what the situation. So that is a long way of basically saying my problem with this doctrine is that in a pure Kappic Eagles force, it can be quite situational. And if it's not situational and you really commit hard to it, you may be spending more points on transports than is actually efficient to do so in a normal Scion force. So it is good, don't get me wrong. Being able to just march across the board, blasting away with hotshot volleys with no penalty, fantastic. But you also have to remember that that part of Doctrine is only for infantry. So all those Dakar primes that you want to be using with your twin Gatling cannon and your hotshot volley guns, this Doctrine doesn't affect it. And I think that if it just said all infantry models of this Doctrine do not suffer the penalty for moving and firing heavy weapons, sorry, if all Kappic Eagle models don't suffer the penalty for moving and firing heavy weapons, I thought it'd be really, really good. But the fact it only specifies infantry means it's really limited. But it is still solid, but possibly not in a standalone Kappic Eagle force. Okay, so don't want to labour that point too much. Don't want to repeat myself. Let's go on to the next thing, which is the relic, which is distraction charges. Now this is quite an interesting relic, and it's a bit more of a tactical one, less overt, but it has some quite good potential. So, reading this directly from the rulebook, the 55th Kappic Eagles model only when resolving an Overwatch attack made by a friendly 55th Kappic Eagles models within 3 inches of this relic. If that attack scores a hit, the target is slowed until the end of the phase. When a charge roll is made for a slowed unit, halve the result rounding up. Very powerful against assault heavy armies, which surprisingly make up a large amount of competitive lists. A lot of people think that shooting is the main game of 8th edition, and it is. It's a lot of shooting, but there are a surprising amount of top tier lists which actually beat you by being really good at close combat. So having an ability where you can slow someone's charge down is really good. So how this works is, if you're within 3 inches of the relic bearer, let's say you've got the relic bearer and a 10-man squad of Scions, your Scions unload their Overwatch on a big, scary, assaulting unit that is maybe 7 or 8 inches away from them. Maybe some sort of marine unit, and it's got loads of buffs, so it's not having to roll that high to get in. All you need to do is hit. You don't need to wound, you don't need to kill, you just need to hit. Now, if you've got a 10-man Scion squad, you all got rapid fire, you know, you're looking at 18 shots because the sergeant has a las pistol or something, and it's either not in range or whatever. And you've got 18 hotshot lasgun shots. That you're going to get at least 3 hits there. Now that means you should get the hit, which means you should then halve the enemy result. Now halving the result is a really big deal. You ask any Space Marine player, and when they have access to those new psychic powers, I'll say new psychic powers. Shadow Spear was a while ago now, but those being able to halve someone's charge is really powerful. Even if they're only 4 inches away, that's an 8-inch charge. If the enemy is over 6 inches away and they don't have any modifiers to their charge roll, they can't make it to you, because you're over. You know, they can't make it to you. Even if they roll a 12, they're not going to make it. So if they're if they're 7 inches or more, they won't make it to you. So that's, when you put it that way, it's really powerful. The enemy has to be basically on top of you to get in. So very good, potentially very anti-meta. Criticism of it, again, kind of situational. What if you don't face an assault army? You know, that basically means the whole relic is just a waste of time. Doesn't do anything. So this is the sort of a theme we're detecting with the Kappic Eagles, which is the relic that they have and the trait they have is good, but potentially situational, and you have to build around it. Same thing for these distraction charges. Now, looking at the Warlord trait. Now, I think the Warlord trait is actually one of the more powerful parts of the Kappic Eagles. It's Master Vox. When using this Warlord's Voice of Command ability, it can issue orders to friendly Kappic Eagle infantry within 24 inches. In addition, while this Warlord is embarked on a transport model, it can still use its Voice of Command ability. When doing so, make any measurement from that transport model's hull. That's a big deal. Okay, that's a big deal, because one of the biggest problems with Scions is not having enough orders, or specifically not having orders in range. So you might end up doing a lot of dropping, commandoing and whatnot, but you might not have enough. You can only take 3 Tempestus Primes. They can't be everywhere at once. You don't want to necessarily invest in an expensive Voxcaster network, because it's going to be starting to eat into points that you really need for more drop Scions. So it's really good having something that can just mean you've got orders wherever you want them. 24 inches is a really long way, especially when you can measure from any point on a hull. That increases the size of the order radius even more if it was, in comparison, if it was on a normal 28mm base. Now, what I do, and I think if I stop there, I would be happy. But I would say I have one little niggle when it comes to, one little criticism when it comes to this Warlord trait, which is, it's encouraging you to you keep your Warlord in a transport, keep them safe. That's great. It's also kind of encouraging you to use this on units which have deployed far away from the Warlord, like deep striking units, for example. But what have we said at the beginning? This trait, this Regimental Doctrine, it doesn't want you to be deep striking things. It wants you to be starting with everything on the board from the get-go. So it's a bit schizophrenic almost. It's like, yeah, deep strike those units and your commander will still be able to give orders to them, no problemo. But then we don't want you to deep strike units in, because then you're not really taking advantage of your best part of your Regimental Doctrine. So it's a bit... Now, where I can see this working, and where you're still getting access to your, at least part of Regimental Doctrine, is if you're deep striking in hotshot volley gun guys. Because they can deep strike in, and they do not suffer the penalty for deep striking with a heavy weapon. So that's always something you can take into account. It's only a small criticism. Having a always on ability to boost your order range is fantastic. I mean, it's the one consistent part of this Regimental Doctrine that we've seen so far. Now, the last bit I want to talk about is the unique stratagem for the Kappic Eagles, and this is called Tactical Misdirection, and it's a bit of a complicated unique stratagem, so bear with me. I'll try and explain it as best as I can. Use this stratagem in your shooting phase when a unit is destroyed by an attack made by a model in a Kappic Eagle unit from your army. In your opponent's next shooting phase, when resolving an attack made by an enemy model against a unit other than that 55th Kappic Eagle unit, subtract 1 from the hit roll if that 55th Kappic Eagles unit is the closest visible unit from your army to that model. Now, what does that mean in layman's terms? Well, essentially, you have a friendly Scion unit and you kill an enemy unit. In your opponent's next shooting phase, he can shoot whoever he wants, but unless he shoots the unit that made the kill and that you put the stratagem on, it's -1 to hit, unless he wants to shoot a target which is closer than him. So how do you set this up? Well, essentially you want to have a unit that is going to be up close in the enemy's face that can make that kill, and then your opponent is forced to make the decision of, well, I want to kill this unit which I want to kill this unit which I might not really want to, it might not be a threat anymore, or I have a -1 to hit against the rest of the army. And it's a bit against what I want to shoot. So it does in theory mean your opponent has to make some difficult choices. The reality of the situation, I'm not so sure. My big criticism of the stratagem is it's kind of difficult to set up and to pull off. You have to put the stratagem on the unit that makes the kill, and that could be difficult. I mean, either you've got to have a unit which is powerful enough to come in and bam, make a kill. You know, a 10-man squad with 4 plasma guns and a plasma pistol, that's guaranteed to get that kill. Or you've got to have a unit which is cheap enough that you don't mind it dying, like just a 5-man lasgun Scion squad. But then you need to essentially use the rest of your army to weaken an enemy squad so that this thing can come in and just plink the final wound off. Which, again, when you're playing a dice game, I don't like what ifs, and you have to set this up so this works. So it's a bit difficult, really. And my second, my other issue with it is, well, it would be great if Scion units were difficult to kill, but they're not. Even if I put a 10-man Scion squad down there, and my opponent has to then sweep away 10 Scions before he gets, to remove the -1 to hit modifier against the rest of my army. That's not that hard to do. Most people can do that with their spare firepower. And you might be saying, well, Mordian Glory, it's a Kappic Eagle unit, not an infantry unit. Why didn't you slap that on a Taurox Prime? Yeah, sure, I could do, but Taurox Primes are typically best used as gunboats, and it's not an ideal situation for one of those things to be really up close and personal to the enemy. So it's a bit. I could use it on Taurox Prime, but then Taurox Prime, and also Taurox Primes aren't cheap. They're 100 odd points. So it's a real. I don't think it is great. I think on paper it has some really good tactical applications. And I've seen a lot of people talk about using a Taurox Prime and then combining it with a couple of Psychers so that you give it +1 save with Psychic Barrier, and then you make it -1 to hit with Night Shroud. So yeah, that is true, but again, it really isn't that difficult for an opponent to kill one Taurox Prime or one Scion squad. So now that we've looked at the unique features of the Kappic Eagles, now let's see how do they best perform on the tabletop. Should they be used in a standalone pure Kappic Eagle army, or are they best used in some sort of Imperial soup? Well, you guys may have guessed it, I've been hinting at it throughout this review. I think they're best used in a soup detachment. So let me go into a bit more detail about that. So in a Scion soup army, what you're doing here is essentially you want to take all your line infantry squads, the ones that will be starting on the board, not deep striking in, and you want to be running those as Kappic Eagles, and you want to be loading them up with hot shot volley guns and putting them in Taurox Primes. These guys, we've talked about this in other videos, they're going to be driving up the board, holding the centre, using those hotshot volley guns and taking advantage of the 24-inch range on those hotshot volley guns to stay out of enemy clutches, but also lay down good rates of firepower. You know, being able to take a 5-man squad with 2 hotshot volley guns, nice and cheap, putting out 8 good shots from those volley guns, really, really good. And the transports that they're in, you actually want to take as another Regimental Doctrine. Most likely, you want to be running those Taurox Primes as Lambda Lions, as Dakar Primes, and you want to be taking advantage of the AP-1 on those Taurox Gatling Cannons. And then the third thing you want to be looking at is your deep striking Scions. You'll be running probably as Iotan Dragons, because you want to be having deep striking rapid fire hotshot lasguns, or deep striking out of Auspex scan range plasma guns with the extra 6-inch rapid fire range from the Iotan Dragons. Or, you know, that's where you could take advantage of 3 different regiments. Or if you think, oh, that's a bit complicated, don't know what I'm doing, simply put it this way, guys. You want to take 2 battalions of Lambda Lions and 1 battalion of Kappic Eagles. Your Lambda Lion infantry, they're all going to be deep striking, and taking those infantry units will allow you to take more dedicated transports of Lambda Lions, which you'll then take as Taurox Primes, and that's where you have your basic battalion of Kappic Eagles, 1 officer for them, 1 Lord Commissar to make up the extra HQ slot, and then enough, you've got to 6 troop choices there to fill your Taurox Primes. Typically in a 2,000 point Scion force, you're going to be looking at about 5 primes, so at least 5 infantry squads with those hotshot volley guns. And that's a nice solid force that you can drive into the middle of the board, castle up, and just lay down significant firepower from 24-inch range with those hotshot volley guns. So that's really, really good. Or you can run this as in an Imperial Guard force, because note carefully, it does not say that the transport that the Kappic Eagles have to jump out of has to be a Militarum Tempestus one. It can be any transport. That includes chimeras. So one of the big problems that Scions have is that whilst Taurox Primes are great, is there a real point sink? For a proper Taurox Prime, you're looking at about 114 to 116 points. That's a Dakar Prime with either a Stormbolter or not a Stormbolter. And that's expensive for a transport. That's almost as expensive as a Lehman Russ. You know, Lehman Russ is only 15 points more and comes, you know, with a lot of plasma death. So why, you know, what happens when you just want a transport to transport? You don't want all the frills, you don't want all the guns. Enter the Chimera. And guess what? You can still put Kappic Eagles inside a Chimera. And the Chimera has a 12-man transport capacity. So guess what? You can put your guys' 10-man squad in there and still have enough room for your Tempesta Prime. Now, I actually think Kappic Eagles work best in this format. And actually, the way I would run them is, if I was to take a proper Kappic Eagle force, I would really lean in to those old school Grenadier style fighting force that you used to be able to perform in the old 4th edition Guard Codex. I know we're going a little bit off on tangent here, guys. But what you want to be doing is essentially putting heavy infantry inside transports and doing a mechanized assault at the enemy. That's how you want to be running your Kappic Eagles. Not deep striking in. Really lean into the doctrine and go, I'm not going to deep strike in. I'm going to take advantage of all my infantry traits And actually I'm going to leave the heavy lifting and the firepower to the rest of the guard. I wouldn't see these Kappic Eagle guys as a traditional Scion force of, you know, deep striking in, hitting hard, almost like Dark Elder. No. I would see them as heavy shock infantry to bludgeon the enemy with, because Scions are now cheap. So how I would run these guys, I'm just going to put out a rough list here, guys, is I would take 3 detachments, and I'd take the first detachment as a spearhead of normal Imperial Guard. And I'd take 2 tank commanders in there, and 3 Leman Russes, and maybe a couple of Basilisks. You want to be filling out all your slots. And because I've taken 5 or 6 units, I'm allowed to then take 5 or 6 dedicated transports, of which I would all make chimeras, and I'd all run them as double heavy bolter chimeras and with a heavy stubber, and I would make that whole detachment Talan, which means I can move and shoot without penalty. And then I would take 2 battalions of Kappic Eagles, and I'd take between those 2 battalions I would take 3 Tempestus Primes and a Lord Commissar, and 6 squads of Kappic Eagle Scions, 1 for each dedicated transport that I'm taking, and I would give each one of those 4 hotshot volley guns and a plasma pistol. And how I would do it is I would form those up into wolf packs, into mechanized assault units, and I would have, for each assault unit, I'd have something like a couple of fire support units, like Leman Russes or Basilisks or tank commanders, backed up by 2 chimeras, and with 10 men in each one, and then an officer accompanying them, which means I then have 20 guys with an officer. The officer's got the role of command, so he can then issue an order to each one, and that would be the best way I would run it. And that way, instead of using your Scions traditionally as I said, these Dark Elder hard-hitting but fragile units, instead actually what you're doing is taking heavy assault infantry. You're taking a mechanized assault force. And I think that's the best way to run Kappic Eagles. I think they are almost the opposite of traditional Scions. They are a sledgehammer bludgeoning tool. They're a heavy infantry force. They are not a commando elite force. And that, guys, is my in-depth tactical review of the Militarum Tempestus Scions Regiment, the Kappic Eagles. Hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you think that I've missed anything, or you've got a good idea regarding the regiment, please put it down in the comments section below. I do read all the comments and I try and get back to them, as many of them as possible. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys next time.